Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sally himself, aka the Kabali Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have insisted, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Let's start our conversation here in the United States. How do you see the election or the election campaigns this far?
Since September 1st, campaigning has really heated up in a huge way, both virtually and to some lesser extent. Also, the normal mode of campaigning, of meeting people in person, even though they are very limited.
President Donald Trump has taken advantage of that. For him, he has said publicly and privately that he will not stop going to the rallies. If anything, he's been doing his campaign as normal, as if nothing is going on or happening in the United States, as opposed to his opponent, Joe Biden, who virtually campaigns from his basement.
As I said, the campaigning is heating up. It is going beyond simply being virtual. And I have had pundits on several television channels criticizing him for what they say he was addressing his supporters indoors. And that even when he was addressing his supporters indoors, his supporters did not have masks, nor did they observe the social distancing that is required, which they say is not really a way that is helping to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus pandemic.
To his defense, Shaka, President Trump has said, or he's contending that he's done an incredible job dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and minimizing the country's death toll.
I think that will be a very hard sell, especially given that as we talk, we are talking about around 195 people who have lost their lives. And we are talking about the United States, a country of 330 million people, which happens to translate into 4% of the world's population. But when you look at the share of the infected people in the United States as compared to the rest of the world, you'll find that the United States in the neighborhood of anywhere between 22 to 25% of those who are infected. That doesn't seem to be, honestly, where the United States needs to be. This is a place where the world expected solutions to initially come from. Some of the observers say part of the reason is because there seems to be a lack of leadership from the federal government.
But again, over the weekend, he in a tweet he said that actually the cases are falling very steadily and fast. The death and the hospitalizations were down, and even cases, despite far more testing than any other country in the world.
I respect the fact that President Trump is entitled to his opinion. But the last time I checked, he definitely is not entitled to his own sets of facts. The statement you made has actually been contradicted by one of his key scientific advisors on his COVID-19 task force, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci, in fact, says, contrary to the statement from President Trump, that the United States seems to be turning a corner. Dr. Fauci says he hasn't seen any evidence to verify that.
What do you make of his challenger, Joe Biden, who has said that this kind of information that is being given out to the public was the life and death betrayal of the American people, and that it's beyond despicable?
Joe Biden, the Democratic Party flag bearer and the key opponent of President Donald J. Trump, is entitled to his opinion. But it seems to me that some of the facts that we have been exposed to, especially the most recent reporting, including tapes by American veteran journalist Bob Woodward of the Watergate fame in the 1970s, some of the tapes that reflect his conversations with President Trump clearly reveal that the president knew as early as in February of this year that this was going to be a very, very dangerous disease, and that this virus, at least according to those tapes, he was briefed by his national security advisor, could perhaps be the defining moment for his presidency. And when you look at the fact that the United States has the largest share of people who have died as a result of COVID-19, and the country also still has the highest number of those who have been infected, it looks like Joe Biden may in fact be supported, or his statements may actually be supported by the evidence that we have actually been exposed to so far.
Let's talk about the national polls. Let's start with one of the most recent polls done by Fox News, shows Biden ahead by 51 to 46 margin, less than the average 7.5% recorded in multiple polls by Real Clear Politics.
It seems to me that as we go forward, we should be expecting the public opinion polls, especially in battleground states, to be tightening closer and closer, which probably means that we may very well, at the end of the day, have a close election. Personally, I do not really see any incontrovertible evidence suggesting or supporting the idea that President Trump is doing very well in the battleground states. What I see clearly is that the president presented himself, for example, as the candidate of law and order, especially as a result of the apparent violence in Kenosha in Wisconsin. But it seems to me that when you again analyze the public opinion polls in as far as the important issues that matter to the electorate, it doesn't seem that the issue of law and order is weighing very heavily so far. What is weighing heavily in his favor, the president's favor so far, is the possible management of the economy. He still runs ahead slightly of Biden when it comes to who could manage the economy better, despite the fact that the United States is in fact experiencing some of the worst statistics since the Depression of the 1930s.
Let's start with a comment from Jonathan Mwende in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Tanzania and Uganda signed an agreement allowing for the construction of a 1,445 kilometer crude pipeline. The 3.5 billion project will connect Uganda's oil fields to Tanzania's port of Tanga. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Ordinarily, I would have said Jonathan has very good news for both countries, Uganda and Tanzania. Except that when you talk about oil these days, it no longer seems to be the black gold that used to be, Paul. In fact, look at the oil prices. They have since plummeted so much, especially because of the issue of the COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic. Because the coronavirus pandemic has significantly affected the manner and the ways in which people around the world live. There are not many factories, frankly, that have been turning the air engines because there are not so many consumers really for the products. You do not find a lot of aircraft in space. You do not find a lot of ships, in waters across the oceans of the world. You no longer see a lot of vehicles, automobiles, or cars on the streets throughout the world because of the virus pandemic. And because of that, what used to be the black gold, oil, is no longer king. Plus, there has also been some other technological adjustments with regards to extracting oil. You're talking about fracking here in the United States, which to a certain degree has virtually made the United States energy sufficient, so much that it no longer imports a lot of oil. Whatever it imports, it actually puts it in a storage for the future generation. And when you think also about those countries across the continent that have oil and benefited from it, you will be surprised that most African countries which have oil remain third world countries. You look at one of the leading oil countries on the African continent, the land of the Oga, Nigeria. Nigeria, yes, has some of the richest individuals on the continent and the planet Earth. But when you look at GNP and you look at the level of poverty, you cannot believe that that is a country that gets billions and billions of dollars from oil. You go to Angola. Angola is another country that gets billions and billions of dollars from oil and has been doing so for several decades. But when you think about the GNP, you think about the quality of life in Angola. The last time I was there, which is about 3 years ago, I must say that I was profoundly disappointed. Because here you are in a country that you are told earns billions and billions of dollars, and yet you go to the capital, Rwanda, and you find many poor people sleeping next to garbage. You are talking about oil. So it seems to me when you look at those two countries, you look at Gabon, you have been there.
Yes.
You look at Equatorial Guinea, you have been there.
I could also add
You
that I
look
was
at,
profoundly disappointed in those countries. They don't
there
look
you are,
like oil producing countries.
there you are, Ndugupor. You look at countries like the Cameroon and so many other countries.
South Sudan.
You actually read, you look at South Sudan, which has oil that could, in fact, bring the kind of wealth to everyone involved except for the greed. You begin to wonder whether actually having oil is a blessing or a curse. For the most part, I have looked at some statistics. Oil has seemed to be a blessing to a certain degree in some Middle Eastern countries, especially for the nationals. You have places like Dubai, which have come up, the United Arab Emirates. You have places like uh, places like
Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait.
you have places like Saudi Arabia. You have Kuwait. I remember when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. You cannot believe that the refugees from the Republic of Kuwait, who had run away from the country, continued to have unfettered access to their money because their oil was working and managed very well. You can go to a country like Norway. Norway has the reputation, by the way, of having turned oil into a blessing. Unlike its other counterparts throughout the world, it put together a fund, a trust fund, where all the money that come from oil are basically kept in that trust fund. And the government of Norway decided that it is not going to touch the money from oil because it argues that to that money belongs to the future generation of Norway.
How about people who say that, for example, this is a greater thing? Having an oil pipeline, it's going to create jobs for thousands and if not millions of people because there are spin-offs of businesses that come as a result of an infrastructure project like that. And also there are people who say that maybe this is what President Yoweri Museveni has been waiting for. He's been talking about oil. If he can get this right, that it will push Uganda to a middle-income country.
There would be many reasons to agree with your argument. If only the world somehow comes up with an effective and safe vaccine or some effective therapeutic or therapy or a cure for the COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic so that life is restored back to what we used to consider as the norm. Then I could see, of course, jobs coming in those two countries as a result of that great pipeline. I think ideally it's a great thing. But to say that simply because you have oil, that helps you to somehow move into a middle class income, it does not necessarily follow. Because if that were the case, a lot of these countries that have oil that we have talked about would be right there. But in terms of whether, in fact, the middle class status is reflected in terms of the economy, is reflected statistically in the stomachs of your people, is reflected statistically in your people's neighborhoods, villages, and across the country, I think that one, for the most part, frankly, remains a dream at best.
all these countries that we've talked about have had issues with corruption when it comes to how they have dealt with their oil reserves. Can Uganda be immune from corruption?
First of all, you should look at the current status of Uganda. When you look at Transparency International records over the years, you clearly find that Uganda does not do very well on that perception index of corruption. Uganda, when you look at, for example, the recent National Resistance Movement Organization ruling party's primary elections, you will find that those elections, and some call them selections, and the reason they say that is because it is only those people who are close to the most powerful members or the elite of the NRM that end up winning. And the reason is because those people tend to have more money than their counterparts. Now, when you look at the manner in which some people have actually received the results of the last ruling party primary elections, you could clearly see that people are beginning to lose confidence in the movement's ability to deliver the things that it promises. There are so many promises that have been made by the Ugandan government, and indeed so many promises that have been made by the ruling National Resistance Movement Organization. But unfortunately, when it comes to the issue of delivering the goodies, it is found missing in action. And so, when you get into the business of extracting and exporting oil, which used to be the black gold, you have to wonder whether there is going to be something that changes in the Ugandan system or the behavior of those in power, or whether the behavior, whether the governance is going to be more of the same. Let me use some personal example here. I was talking to a friend, a gentleman that I grew up with. We were in secondary school together, briefly for about 2 years. And he's a retired secondary school teacher. We were talking about life in general, and we started talking about the recent National Resistance Movement Organization primaries. And he said, Shaka, there are times when you have been critical of the Ugandan government, and especially with regards to elections. There are times I have watched you on television, or I have listened to you on radio, making statements that you are talking about elections in Uganda whose results do not reflect the will of the people, or the people who in fact voted, but rather those results reflect the will of the individual who announces the election, or the individuals who counted the votes. He said, to be honest with you, Shaka, I am afraid that I recently experienced exactly what you are talking about. And I said, how did you exactly experience it, Ndugu? He said, the person that I was supporting during the primaries, I have every reason to believe that this is the person who should have won, because you are talking about an election where people were in fact voting with their feet. They were in lines. So you could actually count. But you cannot believe that rather than my candidate who I supported winning, and all the evidence was there to see, the announcement was a reflection of what you said, as opposed to announcing results, which were clearly a reflection of the will of the people.
Let's go back to the oil thing. Earlier you made a very interesting observation. Oil reserves were found a while back in Uganda, but because of some of the things that you pointed out, for example, corruption, the lack of infrastructure, to this day we've not seen any oil come out of Uganda. What has changed in the last couple of years? What has made Uganda come to terms with the reality on the ground to the extent that they're able to sign a deal with Total and another deal for a pipeline with the government of Tanzania?
I think part of the problem with oil in Uganda is that, from what I have read, is that it is a very heavy wax type of oil. It is not sweet, for example, like the oil that comes from Libya. And because of the nature and the character of the type of oil in Uganda, there have been several reluctant companies to move forward. But so far, it is going to be interesting, because look at that pipeline. That's a very, very long way.
And it has to be heated all the way.
Again, because it is very heavy, very waxy. Now the thing is, Uganda has the disadvantage of not having any further access to the sea. It is very, very much landlocked. It is many, many miles or kilometers removed from the nearest port, either Mombasa in Kenya, Kilindini in Kenya, or Dar es Salaam or Tanga in Tanzania. Uganda also does not have a very good railway infrastructure, because if they had a very good, or even simply a good railway infrastructure, it could probably take advantage of that. It could export or transport its oil to a certain degree by train to the nearest pipeline or nearest seaport. But I hope that it does not turn out as what they say, a white elephant.
That's a great point, Shaka. I remember 3 years ago going to Kenya to cover the Chinese SGR, the standard gauge railway. And I led a team of investigative reporters to Kenya, where we managed to trace right from Mombasa all the way to Nairobi to Kisumu, how the Chinese were building this railway. But the one thing, the elephant in the room that nobody was talking about, was the cost and how this is going to be paid by Kenyans at the end of the day. The government borrowed so much money to build the Chinese standard gauge railway. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, it's a great infrastructure project, but at the end of the day, the cost falls on the people of Kenya. So where is Uganda getting this money? They are borrowing money to build this pipeline. And who is going to be responsible for paying back these loans?
That could be, Ndugu Paul, what they characterize as the $64 million question.
Shaka, let's end it there. Thank you so much for your time.
You are most welcome.